Good morning, this is Rob Orrison with the Emerging Civil War and the Prince William County Historic Preservation Division. I am with Kevin Pawlak, our site manager at Benland Historic Site. And we are standing on the banks of the beautiful Bull Run here at Blackburns Ford, just in between the city of Manassas and Centerville. Many years ago, on July 18th, this would have been a tough spot to be standing in. You are actually between the Union behind you and the Confederate line behind me in front of you. Now, what we're going to talk about here briefly is the lead up to the Battle of First Manassas or First Bull Run, depending on where you're from, is what you call it. We're going to call it First Manassas since we're here in Manassas. So keep in mind, the beginning of the war, you have two armies here in Northern Virginia, the Confederate Army under Pierre Gustave Totent Beauregard, positioned at Manassas Junction about 4 miles south of here, with about 20 to 25,000 men. In Washington, D.C., you have the Army of Northeastern Virginia under Irvin McDowell. Both these armies are very ill-trained. Both these armies are very green. Lincoln is quoted as telling McDowell, yes, you are green, but they are green also. But Lincoln is under fire. He has to make some kind of movement here in Virginia because it's all about politics, and nothing has changed in 158 years. It's all about politics. Lincoln is getting pressure to move against the Confederate forces here in Northern Virginia. Also keep in mind, a lot of these Union troops have signed up for 3-month enlistments after Fort Sumter. We're getting pretty close to that time where their enlistments run up. Lincoln has to get McDowell moving, and McDowell will start to move around July 15th and 16th, and he'll make his way out, albeit very slowly, from the forts around Arlington, the Robert E. Lee's plantation, Arlington, and Alexandria, move his way out to Fairfax Courthouse, which is today Fairfax City. He'll push out a small Confederate outpost in Fairfax that Beauregard has put there to kind of keep an eye on the roads. Those Confederates are going to fall back here behind Bull Run. And so McDowell's plan is to try to outflank the Confederate forces in Manassas to the east, to your left and my right. When McDowell rides out in that area around modern-day Clifton, he realizes the terrain is not good for that movement, and he'll take his entire army and center around Centerville behind you here in about 2 miles. So McDowell has pressure to move. He actually has his army now in the field. These men, as I said, have been marching somewhat slow. These are not well-trained professional soldiers, and he's got to do something with his men. And what he's going to do is he's going to order reconnaissance and force to here to Blackburns Ford on July 18th. And that reconnaissance and force is going to turn into a little bit of a major action here. Small when you look at the entire 4 years of the American Civil War, but for July 1861, it's one of the first major battles here in Virginia, and will actually kind of play out and make a huge impact into how things take place on the battlefield on July 21st. Now, to get in the details of Blackburns Ford, I'm going to bring in Kevin. Kevin has been doing some research on this and been studying on this. We actually have a bus tour coming up on Sunday with a good friend and historian Harry Smeltzer. Kevin's going to get into more of the details of what's going on here at Blackburns Ford.
So as Rob mentioned, this is all the result of a reconnaissance, really you could say almost a reconnaissance gone wrong for Irvin McDowell in the Federal Army. While McDowell was scouting towards the east, he sent or ordered one of his division commanders, Daniel Tyler, to move towards the direction of Manassas Junction. There were two options that Tyler had moving south from Centerville. He could try to cross at McDowells Ford, which is slightly to our west from Blackburns Ford, or he could take the direct road to Blackburns, which is the one that ultimately he chose. He was not to bring on a general engagement. McDowell was very clear about that. But nonetheless, this engagement, as so many Civil War engagements do, spiraled out of control pretty quickly. Some historians will blame Daniel Tyler for that. Others will say that it was just the nature of Civil War combat. But nonetheless, some of the first Federal troops to approach Blackburns Ford and Bull Run are some artillery, a couple of guns that were posted several hundred yards north of the stream, and they fired pretty much without any response for about a half hour. It was Daniel Tyler just trying to feel out the strength of the Confederate force on the south bank of Bull Run. After about a half hour, the Confederates began to respond, Daniel Tyler sent some of his infantry forward. First was the 1st Massachusetts Infantry, and then followed by the 12th New York. And this was a very confused action as the Massachusetts men moved forward. They saw Confederate skirmishers on the north bank of the stream, and one of the Massachusetts men yelled out to those soldiers in front of him. He asked who they were. The Confederates shot back asking who these men were. And one of the Massachusetts soldiers replied, "We are Massachusetts men." That response was greeted by a volley from these Confederate skirmishers, and the action picked up from there. More Confederate troops were brought into the engagement. Jubal Early's brigade reinforced James Longstreet's men, which was the main Confederate force holding the south bank of Bull Run. Eventually, some of Longstreet's men would actually come across to the north side of the stream, scatter the 12th New York, and by this point in the afternoon of July 18th, some of Irvin McDowell's staff officers had arrived on site, and they were reminding Daniel Tyler not to bring on a general engagement. Some of Tyler's subordinates were urging Tyler from the other side of the coin to continue the engagement, to continue pushing the Confederates, but ultimately by mid-afternoon of July 18th, Daniel Tyler decided to pull his men back towards Centerville. All told, the casualties for that day were about 83 Federal casualties and nearly 70 Confederate casualties. So as Rob mentioned, very small in the grand scheme of things, but for July 1861, this was a consequential engagement that both sides remembered and both sides wrote about. It would also become consequential for Irvin McDowell because, coupled with the information that he gathered from off to our east, the area off to our east, realizing that that was no place to march his army, he also realized that the Confederate center was strong, and so McDowell began to look upstream further to our north as a place to get around the Confederate left. And so what happens here on July 18th very quickly changes Irvin McDowell's plan for the battle, and ultimately will usher in the Battle of Manassas as we know it on the morning of July 21st, 1861. Join us soon enough. We'll be at a couple of other sites talking about the history of the battle on July 21st, but for right now, this is Rob and I from Emerging Civil War signing off at Blackburns Ford.